And we are live, I think. Pretty sure we're live. Yep. Okay. What is up, everyone? Oh, here we go. Okay. Sorry, there was kind of a lag between my computer screen and the live stream. Okay, so what's up, everyone? Welcome to the No Man's Land. I'm Angela Ramirez. Today is 11/11. I didn't even realize that. But today's 11/11, and we are going to be talking about Dominion voting systems. A lot of you guys were really interested in the background of the company, who owns the company, what the whole deal is with Dominion voting systems, and I have spent the last 2 days doing a crazy big deep dive into who these guys are. I'm shocked, honestly, at what I found, and I think that you guys are going to be very interested as well. If my voice sounds a little hoarse, it kind of is, but bear with me here. So, Dominion voting systems, for those of you guys who don't know who they are the company that is pretty much at the heart of this glitch scandal that's going on nationwide. It has been an issue in Michigan and Georgia that we know of. In fact, Georgia today, this morning, came out saying that they're going to be doing a full hand recount of the whole entire state and doing an audit of the election in order to ensure the results. I think it's really important to note that they're going to be doing a hand recount. That is very important. Hey Jim, good to see you. I was thinking about you today and how I owed you this video. So I'm glad you're here. Thanks for watching. I think you're going to be really shocked at what we talk about. I think before I get into the history of security issues that has been around for 15 years with this company, I'm going to talk about an acquisition that the company made in 2010. This is wild. I honestly kind of can't believe I couldn't believe it when I saw this, but it's fact. So here we go. Let's dive into it. In 2010, Dominion Voting Systems acquired a company by the name of, let's see here, Sequoia Voting Systems. So this article, if you guys are interested in reading it, you can find it on my website. It's theNoManZone.com. And the reason I write these articles is so that you guys can actually see all of the sources that I'm going through. Everything from the websites that I'm pulling, the records of like the U.S. House government records that I referenced to come up with these articles. That way it's not just me talking, you actually have a written record. So if you wanted to read the article, it is on the site, but I think sometimes it's a little bit easier for everybody to just kind of listen. So I'm going to go through this article here. In 2010, Dominion Voting Systems acquired a company with suspected ties to the Hugo Chavez regime in Venezuela. And this is no joke. The House government was actually really concerned about this to the point where they actually launched an investigation at one point. So let's get into it. In 2010, Dominion Voting Systems, which is a Canadian company, this is not a U.S. company. And that's important because we actually have a foreign entity that's running the election infrastructure here in the U.S. That's pretty odd. So they acquired this company called Sequoia Voting Systems, and Sequoia was believed to be linked to Venezuela's government. They were actually owned by a parent company called Smartmatic, which has been on the radar for U.S. officials for years, actually. And when the purchase of Sequoia happened, they actually purchased everything. It wasn't just the clients. They also purchased the company's intellectual property. They purchased the software, the firmware, and the hardware. So basically everything that it takes to build these machines, the programming, the code, the machine itself, they got everything out of it. And the reason that's super important is because it's one thing to purchase a company and only get like the clients and the employees. It's a totally different thing to get all of their intellectual property rights. That means basically they could recreate the systems that were being used by these voting machines to a T. So Smartmatic, what's the deal with Smartmatic? they are the parent company, the holding company of Sequoia Voting Systems. And remember, Dominion bought Sequoia, they didn't buy Smartmatic. But the reason Smartmatic is important is because they were actually founded by two Venezuelan nationals. I believe they were dual citizens, but two Venezuelan nationals who were computer scientists essentially, and they designed the software. Now, Smartmatic and the Venezuelan government have both openly denied that there's any link between the Chavez regime and these machines. But that said, there has been a lot of slippery activity by the Smartmatic founders. They did some really strange things. So we're going to get into it. Let's dive in. Okay, so 2010, Dominion purchased Sequoia Voting Systems from the holding company Smartmatic. Included in the purchase, like I said, was all of the intellectual property. Now, Sequoia had been under scrutiny by U.S. House legal representatives and the government the U.S. government for suspected ties to Venezuelan Chavez regime, which is a socialist, obviously Marxist regime. Now, this is kind of funny. Smartmatic, when they started realizing they were under fire from the U.S. government, they said, okay, well, we'll willingly undergo an investigation. That way you guys can audit our financial records and you can see that we're not actually a subsidiary of the Venezuelan government. So they offered to go under investigation, right? Well, the U.S. took them up on that. They said, great, we'll investigate you. Let's get started. So they did. And 2 months after the investigation started, Smartmatic said, you know what, actually, I think we're just going to sell the company. And I think that there's no need to do this investigation anymore. So they then withdrew from the investigation. And over about 4 years, they put the company up for sale multiple times for 4 years, couldn't sell it. And then finally, it was sold to none other than Dominion Voting Systems, who's having the issues with glitches around the company or around the country today. This picture here on the screen, if you guys can see it, this is actually a press statement from Dominion Voting Systems when they purchased Sequoia. Now, this statement here is not available online anymore unless you go through Internet Archives. So in other words, they pulled it from their site and it's no longer on their website. The only reason that I found it was I was looking through Internet Archives and actually found the press release. And here, if you read it, it's kind of small text, but if you look at what it says here, it says that they purchased Sequoia Voting Systems, and the solution was serving at that time 300 jurisdictions in 16 states, so a significant portion of the U.S. As a part of the transaction, it says Dominion has acquired Sequoia's inventory and all intellectual property. That means all intellectual property, everything, code, scripts, processes, everything. So these machines, as they were under Sequoia, was transferred over to Dominion. Now, it's really hard to tell what changes were made after this purchase happened. That's something that's going to take a little bit more work. But the thing about this is that it says here, this is interesting, Dominion says it will also retain Sequoia's facilities in Denver, Colorado. So, and it also says San Leandro, California. I'm not sure where San Leandro is. If anybody knows where that is in California, let me know. I'm not familiar with that area. But I am here in Colorado, and I can tell you that Dominion Voting Systems is still in Colorado today. And the reason that I think that's significant is because Denver, Colorado has turned into one of the most progressive left areas of the country. There are multiple openly socialist city council members in the Denver area. They are very much pushing this whole Black Lives Matter agenda. There are some public officials who are kind of distancing themselves from it, to be fair, such as Mayor Hancock, who has come out kind of against the whole direct action movement. He actually called the Antifa guys who were up in Denver terrorists, which is, I think, accurate. But the reason that I find this interesting is because Colorado used to be a red state. It used to be pretty conservative, and I think a lot of areas of the country still are, but the greater Denver area, where we have so much of where most of our population is, has turned really progressive. And I find it interesting that this company is based in Denver. And as a matter of fact, it's really only located like 30 minutes away from our state capital. So it is right in the mix of everything that's going on in Denver. Something that it says here in this statement is that the optical scan select election systems serve 26 million U.S. voters. So 26 million in 2010. Today, Dominion and two other companies control 90% of the U.S. election market, which means that 90% of all voting machines in the U.S. are controlled by 3 privately owned companies, one of which, Dominion, is a Canadian-owned company. I don't know about you, but I think it's really strange that an election software for the U.S. is owned by a Canadian company with software manufacturers who are basically Venezuelan tech engineers, because that's where they got this software. So that's pretty strange. Now let's talk about what happened in Venezuela that put these guys on the radar. So back before Dominion had purchased Sequoia voting systems, Sequoia actually teamed up with a government-owned entity to run the 2004 election. So just to read from this article here, it says, in preparation for Venezuela's 2004 controversial election, this election was contested by people in Venezuela. It says, Smartmatic Sequoia teamed up with a Venezuelan company called Bitza to provide voting machines for the upcoming election. The election would decide whether or not Hugo Chavez would continue his rule over the country. So get this, basically this 2004 election meant that Hugo Chavez was basically up for re-election. The people could vote whether or not they wanted to keep him in office. And remember, Hugo Chavez was a dictator. So it is odd, right, for a Venezuelan dictator to say, hey, you can choose to vote me out of office, right? Then what happened was Hugo Chavez said, we're going to implement all electronic voting. We're going to make sure that you can vote entirely on a computer. The entire computer system will also count every single vote, and then it will provide the tally. So everything was electronic. It was all digital. There was no paper ballots. And what happened was Sequoia teamed up with Bitza, but Bitza at the time was 28% owned by the Chavez government. And it was also believed that Bitza and Smartmatic had an interlocking board members like team. So basically some of the people who served on the board at Bitza also served on the board at Smartmatic. So those two together, those two companies, then partnered with a third company, which was CAN TV, and they were a telephone company. Now, the interesting thing about CAN TV is they were said to be a privatized company. They were said to be privately owned, like it was just a random business owner who owned the company. But in 2007, Chavez took control of that company, and he didn't pay market value for it. He said, in his words, that the company owed him a debt and that he wouldn't pay what it was worth. So that, I think, is really odd that, 3 years before Chavez took over the control of one of the largest telephone companies basically in the country, and these guys were also providing internet service, which I think is kind of the key there, that he used them to run an election in which he was putting himself up for re-election. If you guys remember what happened in Russia and Belarus just recently, Putin was actually up for re-election. And I bring this up because I want to kind of highlight what happens when a dictator allows himself to be put up for re-election. So modern day, Putin puts himself up for re-election. He's up against I don't remember the guy's name, but he was kind of like a people's guy. Like, he was very much the people's representative, and he got a lot of support from just everyday Russians. And after the election happened, Putin pretty much declared himself the winner. He didn't really, in other words, the election was rigged. And the guy who ran against him actually was poisoned. He made it, but Putin poisoned him with a nerve gas. So that was Russia today, right? Now, whether or not Hugo Chavez rigged the election is unclear, but I did include in this article, one of my sources is a forensic study of what happened in Venezuela for the 2004 election. And basically they're saying because of the way the software was set up, because it was paperless entirely and the machines never the machines never printed out any record of how the votes were tallied or what votes were cast, that it was almost impossible, even with an audit, to prove that there was any foul play. So in other words, the way that these machines were set up, they were set up to prevent auditing from exposing any fraud, which is really crucial when we think about the fact that the intellectual property, the way that these machines were designed for the Venezuelan election, are now intellectual property of the company that's running the U.S. elections today. So that's super interesting. Here in this section of the blog, we just kind of go over a few quotes that Venezuela and the company owners presented to U.S. officials, where they said that there was no Venezuelan government holding of this company. But what's interesting is one of the owners of this company, Sequoia, he was the owner of Smartmatic, but at the time they owned Sequoia, Antonio Munguisa, he was denied, hey, how you doing, Zandra? ¿Cómo estás? So the guy who basically owned Smartmatic, he was a Venezuelan citizen, and at the time he was living in Venezuela. And then he wanted to come back to the U.S. to do business. Well, guess what? The U.S. refused to offer him a visa. So in other words, the U.S. said, no, you can't re-enter the country, you're a threat. But at the same time, the U.S. continued to allow this software to be used for their elections, created by the guy that they wouldn't allow in the country. Kind of weird. That's like a super strange contradiction there. So basically, the gist of this little article here that I wrote is that Dominion Voting Systems acquired a company that is believed to have had a hand in some type of potential rigging of the Venezuelan election that allowed Hugo Chavez to return to maintain power in 2004. And now we have today where there's multiple glitches and just weird things happening with these machines. Now, I'm going to change to a different article that I also published. This article is about the supply chain and the issues with weird glitches that this company has a history of just like basically with their machines. So I already told you guys that in Michigan it was 6,000 votes that were allocated to the wrong party. Then in Georgia, these machines actually went down on election day. And the county clerk said that the reason that they went down is because the manufacturer put out an update the night before. And so basically, it's unclear if these guys even tested the machines to make sure that they worked after the so-called update was pushed out the night before election day. But in my opinion, and this is obviously just opinion, but it would take some time to test all of the computers that were pushed an update to make sure that they worked. And if an update happened the night before and voting starts, let's say 8 a.m., I think it's actually 7 a.m. voting starts, but, that doesn't give a lot of time for these softwares to be tested to make sure that they work right. Now, you all heard me say that Sidney Powell, who is a lawyer, she's been calling this vote switching phenomenon a feature of Dominion voting system software, not a glitch. And I think, in my opinion, based on what we see in this next article, that could be very likely. So, since 2005, people have been raising the alarm of security issues with these companies, and not just like a single security issue. There have been multiple issues with these computer systems, these voting machines, that not only offer foreign influence to kind of come in and mess with the election, but it also makes it so that people here on U.S. soil can easily commandeer these machines and push results in one way or another. So The Secretary of State, to be fair, the Michigan Secretary of State, where those votes were switched, Jocelyn Benson, she says that it wasn't a glitch, it was just human error, and that there's like really nothing to worry about, basically. And the New York Times is also saying the same thing. The New York Times says there's no suspicion of voter fraud. Now, that is interesting because, again, for 15 years, since 2005, people have been saying there's some serious issues with this software. Example one is a guy named Harry Hursty. He is famous for what's called the Hursty hack, and in 2005, he hacked the software used for voting. And he came out in April and he said, hey, the software that I hacked in 2005 is still being used. In fact, it's going to be used in the 2020 election. Like, I'm just letting you guys know, basically, that these machines have already been hacked. People know how to hack them. And the fact that they haven't been fixed is like a huge issue of national security. So Harry Hursty, basically, like I said, he's a hacker. I don't want to say he's a hacker, but he's like a cybersecurity expert who got his hands on some of these machines just to see how easy it would be to hack them. And he actually said that it only took a single step to hack these machines. And he explained in a written testimony that multiple aspects of the voting machine software were basically had weaknesses that would allow anybody who with the proper knowledge to come in and manipulate results. That included tabulators, high-speed scanners, and memory cards. And in, I believe it was Michigan, that was where they had an issue with the tabulator. They said, oh, well, the tabulator just came out with the wrong numbers. Somebody fed the ballots in the wrong way, basically, and it was human error, and the tabulator messed up because of human error. Well, according to Harry Hursty, these tabulators can actually be hacked, and he says that they can be hacked very easily. So that's kind of a contradiction with what all these elected officials are saying, that this voting software, whether it be, the computers themselves or the mail-in votes or anything, all these election officials are saying, no, there's no evidence of fraud. Voting is safe and secure, and instead, we have cybersecurity experts like Harry Hursty saying, no, that's not the case. In fact, Hursty had come out with a documentary. It's on YouTube. You guys could watch it if you wanted to. It's called Hacking Democracy, and it's just a short documentary about his attempt at hacking these machines, and he shows you just how easy it is to hack them. And like I said, he came forward in April and warned everybody. He's like, hey, the software that I used in 2005, or the software that I hacked in 2005, still being used today. Now, it's beyond me why 15 years later, after somebody shows you that your software has some serious issues, that they would continue to use it, but I'll leave that for you guys to decide. Another interesting thing that I dug up, this is really weird. So, I remember, I think it was Jim who asked me the last time if there was any ties to Nancy Pelosi and the Clinton Foundation. And the answer is yes, actually. There are some ties to Nancy Pelosi. In fact, one of the individuals who is a lobbyist for Dominion voting systems does have ties back to working with Nancy Pelosi. What's more is, this is pretty crazy, the Dominion voting systems owner, is it the owner? I'm blanking on that. Let's see here. I have it right here. The Dominion Voting Systems, so Dominion Voting Systems, not the owner, but the company itself, actually made a donation to the Clinton Foundation. They partnered with the Clinton Foundation, and they donated like $2.25 million worth of technology and resources so that the Clinton Foundation could basically help this group from Canada to spread electronic voting devices to areas where they had recently had like upheavals over election issues. So to explain better, there's this group called the Delian Foundation, and they are based in Canada, which is interesting because Dominion Voting Systems is also headquartered in Canada. They just have a headquarters in Denver, but their actual like business license and everything like that stems from Canada. So they're a foreign company. so is the Delian Project. Hillary Clinton, I shouldn't say Hillary Clinton, but the Clinton Foundation, which she is a part of, it's like her foundation. The Clinton Foundation partnered with Dominion Voting Systems. Dominion Voting Systems gave the Clinton Foundation $2.25 million worth of material and assistance so that they could together work with the Delian Project to so-called spread democracy and help people get access to electronic voting. But what we're seeing here is that electronic voting is actually not as safe as everybody likes it to sound. And interesting is that the Brennan Center, who is owned by the Brennan Center is owned by Bill Clinton's speechwriter. And in 2019, so a year ago, they came out with this huge report about how all of the U.S. election machines were super susceptible to hacking from many different points. So basically they said, Harry Hershey's right. Here's a report on it. Interesting is that now the Brennan Center, and remember, the guy who owns the Brennan Center is Bill Clinton's ex-speechwriter, so he has also ties to the Clintons. Now the Brennan Center is saying that we had a largely glitch-free election, and I kid you not, this is actually like on their website. The president of the Brennan Center wrote an article saying that the election was largely glitch-free, and I can't help but like laugh a little bit when they say that, because it reminds me of how the protests I don't even want to call them protests, how the attack on Kenosha, the direct action in Kenosha, was labeled as fiery but mostly peaceful. Meanwhile, like half the town is burning down, and now like the Brennan Center is saying we had a largely glitch-free election, when a year ago they were saying that these machines have serious vulnerabilities, that foreign powers can exploit them, and it's kind of, not only is it a contradiction, but it's concerning how much their tune has changed now that basically their party has won. Because we all know that Hillary Clinton was pulling for Joe Biden. Hillary Clinton lost in 2016, and it just makes me wonder if this report was kind of fueled by her loss. It does seem that this is a bit of a partisan report. But anyway, I want to go into some of the things that they pointed out back in 2019 when they were still kind of saying that these machines had issues. Now they seem to have forgotten that the machines have issues, but I think it's worth going through and looking at what they said originally, because it is some good information. So, Brennan Center report, colored pencils receive more federal oversight than election infrastructure. That sentence kind of hits, if that sentence hits you weird, it's because it hit me weird too. And it's true. The colored pencil industry and basically every other industry in the US, specifically industries that have to do with critical infrastructure, elections, communications, defense, weapons, all of those industries have super strict standards. When it comes to supply chains, you have to use certain types of components and you have to prevent certain areas from manufacturing those components because they can be rigged, and it can make you susceptible to like hacking and malfunctions, right? For example, if we had a good example is Huawei. We haven't allowed Huawei in the country, and the reason for that is because a lot of Chinese tech has been found to have these like malicious components built into them, whether it's like a small computer chip or the software that's being used in the machines. That's why TikTok has recently been banned, is because they actually discovered that when you're using TikTok, the producers of the app can actually follow you. Once you close the app, they can follow you and they can actually see what you're looking at even when you're not on TikTok. So for example, you open TikTok, you scroll through, you look at some videos, and then you're like, oh, I'm gonna go check my bank account. TikTok can still track you when you have the app closed and you're looking at your bank account. So that's one of the reasons that TikTok has been outlawed. I don't even know that it's been outlawed, but it was looking at being outlawed. In India, they completely got rid of it. India got rid of TikTok, and I think it was 53, maybe 58 other Chinese apps, because they realized that the Chinese apps, even though you were using them as appropriately designed, they were following you around the internet trying to collect your information, which is a super serious national security threat. So anyway, back to the Brennan Center report. Colored pencils receive more federal oversight than election infrastructure. Here's a quote from that report. It says, "The ability of a foreign power to exploit the vulnerabilities of a vendor in a single county in Pennsylvania could have extraordinary repercussions for the whole country." So it says here that they pointed out that weaknesses in election infrastructure, it doesn't have to be widespread. It could be one county. Now, let's take a look at the fact that we now have 2 different states that are struggling with what they're calling glitches, but it's starting to look more like some sort of hack or possibly some sort of feature, as Sidney Powell would put it. And tomorrow I'm going to be coming out with some information about a software engineer and like an internet expert. He has put together a whole bunch of research that I kind of understand. I kind of don't. I need to do more research on exactly what it all means. But basically, he's saying that the Dominion software user manual actually does allow for hacking or people to come in and kind of change things without being authorized. And it's true. It's like from their own user manual. So that's something that I want to talk about, but I'm not a super big tech guru, so I need to do a little bit more research on exactly what those features are. But the fact that just a year ago, the Brennan Center said that one county can cause a serious issue for the rest of the U.S., we're seeing 2 states now that have had these issues. And not only is it 2 states, but Georgia is, I mean, it's not just 2 counties. Georgia, the whole state of Georgia, is now doing a recount by hand. They're not using the machines to do the recount. They're doing a full recount by hand. And like I said earlier, that is a big deal, because if they didn't have suspicions about this software, it's unlikely that they would have chosen a hand recount. Something else that the report said that I thought was really interesting was that it says there is almost no federal regulation of the vendors that design and maintain the systems that allow us to determine who can vote, how they vote, or how their votes are counted and reported. So, this is huge. Like I said, critical infrastructure, weapons, national security, even our police system, those are all considered critical infrastructure. And they all have to abide by certain standards for the materials that they use, for the technology that they use, but those standards are not applied to the election stuff. Instead, it's very much just like, well, we trust you to do the right thing. And when you're talking about 3 companies owning essentially the entire market of election infrastructure, you basically have created an unregulated monopoly for our voting system. And that is not an over-exaggeration. Like, we call big tech monopolies, right? And I think that they very much are. And when we had the steel industry, the oil industry, stuff like that, we were very critical of not only the fact that they were monopolies, but making sure that they were regulated. And here we have not only monopolies of the way that we vote, but we also have no regulation and federal oversight over these issues. So it's strange that something so important as voting has kind of just flown under the radar. So the next thing, so here's this part about largely glitch-free. This is crazy. Anyway, so all of this stuff about critical infrastructure brings me to the part about supply chain integrity. And this is where I got really into the research. I actually looked at the Secretary of Defense's reports on cybersecurity supply chains to get this information, because this is seriously important. Like I mentioned, the whole TikTok thing. Imagine knowing that you can go on TikTok and then close the app and China can follow you to your bank account and see what's in your bank account. They can see if you take off the hidden, you know how when you type in your password, it just has all those little dots, but if you press the I, it will show you exactly what you typed. If you do that and you have TikTok on your phone, it's very likely that they can actually see your password. So this is how important understanding cybersecurity is. And when it comes to election stuff, we're using parts from China in our election machines. So, like I said, critical infrastructure, weapons, communications, we have standards. That's not the case for elections. Now, the Defense Science Board's task force on cybersecurity wrote a whole, I don't even know, it was 275 pages, a report about how microelectronics, like a memory chip, or the stuff inside your computer, think about how small all that is, right? One tiny little piece of that, if it is maliciously manufactured to have features that aren't supposed to be there, it could just kind of lay dormant, and then whenever they want to turn it on, just like that, it's turned on, and now it can shut down your computer, it can change things on your computer, it can start recording your information. This is all stuff that's actually happened. And the Defense Science Board, which is a part of the Department of Defense, the Department of Security, they stated that even a microelectronic included in a manufacturer's supply chain can cause serious issues. It has actually, and then they say that it's not just in government sector that this can happen. They said that it's actually been seen in the private sector. So basically, stuff that you would buy off the shelf. For example, I'm just going to read a quote here. It says, insertion of a malicious microelectronic vulnerability via the supply chain can occur at any time during production. Exploitation via malicious insertion has, however, been confirmed in the commercial sector. Prominent recent examples include Volkswagen's insertion of a defeat device to thwart emissions testing. So what that means is that these little tiny components can actually change the way something appears to work. So what they're talking about with Volkswagen, if you guys remember this, Volkswagen came out with this whole thing about how they had really great gas emissions on their cars, and they were like, oh yeah, our cars are super green, they're good for the environment, they don't use as much gas, they emit less carbon. And then after an investigate, okay, so they said this, right? And then what happened is people took their cars to get tested, because in places like California, you have to get your car tested so that they can tell what kind of emissions they're giving off. And if it's over a certain amount of emissions, they don't let you drive it. You have to get certain parts of your car fixed so that it puts out less emissions, right? So people, they bought the Volkswagen thinking that they were making the right green choice. And then they took it to get tested, and everybody who tested them was like, oh great, yep, you're just fine, it's doing great on emissions. But what happened was Volkswagen actually had a component in their car, in their car's computer system, to where if somebody were to test it, the computer would recognize that it was being tested, and then it would change the amount of emission. It would change what it was saying the emissions were. It wasn't actually low on emissions. In fact, it was actually 40 times worse than what it was supposed to be legally. But because they had put a little computer trick in there, people who tested it, the computer would say, yep, I'm giving out low emissions, but in reality, it was not giving out low emissions. In reality, it was giving out 40 times the legal amount. And so that's just one example of how companies can use these tiny little pieces of electronics, like memory cards or hard drives, and they can use that to pretend something is working the way it should, when in reality it's actually doing something completely different. And I think it took a government investigation for them to actually find out about Volkswagen. I'm not too positive on how they found out about it, but once they did find out, Volkswagen got crazy lawsuits. They were sued up the yin-yang for that, because they not only did they knowingly lie about the emissions they were giving out, they actually inserted software to prevent people from finding out that they were lying. I don't know how much worse it gets than that. But if Volkswagen, a car manufacturer, can do that, just imagine for 1 second what could happen when you have a country's election integrity in the balance, and they're using foreign parts, totally unregulated, totally not subject to federal oversight in these machines. And so that's exactly what Dominion Software and these two other major companies have been doing. It's let's see here, in January this year, so right before the presidential election, Dominion Voting Systems, and the two other manufacturers that make the voting machines had to show up before Congress to talk about the fact that they were using Chinese-made machine components in their machines. And, these guys do have some really important lobbyists. Like I said, one of the lobbyists who is associated with Dominion Voting Systems has also ties back to Nancy Pelosi. Dominion Voting Systems donated $2.25 million worth of material and resources to the Clinton Foundation. Pelosi and Clinton are two of the most influential people in the Democrat Party, or at least maybe not in active politics because Clinton's pretty much out, but they have a lot of leeway. And so in 2020, January this year, Dominion Voting Systems, the two other manufacturers, they appeared before Congress to talk about the fact that they were using Chinese-made parts in their machines. And it's really weird because the three manufacturers said, oh yeah, we welcome federal oversight. Please tell us what we can do to improve our machines. But it's kind of too little too late. The election is happening in 10 months. They're not going to remanufacture all new machines, swap out all of the parts that are being used in existing machines. It's just not feasible for this to actually get anywhere before the election. So they said, yeah, we welcome change, but nothing happened. There was no bills passed. There was nothing that actually really changed the way that these companies are operating, right? So, and the reason I say that it's kind of funny that this happened is because it reminds me of, Joe, I'm not sure, what do you mean, Nancy D'Alessandro? Are you talking about Nancy Pelosi? Is that her nickname or something like that? So basically, these software machines, right? No federal oversight, Chinese parts. And the reason that they said, so this is total speculation, right? But you remember how I was talking about how Sequoia, the company that Dominion purchased, how they said they welcomed federal investigations, but then 2 months into the investigations, they basically said, oh, we're actually just going to sell the company. It kind of reminds me of that. Oh, okay, so D'Alessandro is Nancy's maiden name? I did not know that. That's interesting. Interesting. Joe sounds like he's done some investigating into Nancy Pelosi, or Nancy D'Alessandro. Let us know what else you know about her, Joe. I'm interested. So yeah, it almost sounds like a please come check us out, please come help us kind of thing, but then at the end of the day, did anything happen? No, nothing happened. So that's pretty weird. Which brings me to the fact that these companies have no risk mitigation. This is the bare minimum of risk mitigation. And we're not talking about cars, we're not talking about cell phones, we're talking about whether or not the votes of the people of this country actually are being counted the way that they're supposed to. And one, the fact that Dominion Voting Systems is a Canadian company, that should raise a few red flags. Why do we have a foreign company providing a huge number of voting machines for our country? Between Dominion and the two other companies, they make up 90% of the market, and that's an actual figure. They actually make up 90% of the market. So not only do we have a foreign company providing the election infrastructure here, we also have that foreign company using parts from China. Now, the reason that the whole China thing is important, China is a communist country that has leveraged capitalism to dominate a bunch of different markets, electronics being one of them. And for those of you, so I've been following what's going on in China for, I don't know, probably 4 or 5 months now, pretty closely. And it is it's very rare for a very large company, manufacturing or otherwise, to not be influenced in some way or another by the Chinese Communist Party. Now, the Chinese Communist Party is very different from the people of China. The people of China, they have, I have no issue with the people of China. I have no issue with their like history, their heritage. That said, the Chinese Communist Party is a serious freaking issue. They are, how many of you guys are aware of the Uyghur Muslim camps? There's some serious issues going on in communist China right now. Humanitarian issues. Hold on, let me read what Joe says here. Joe says, Joe says Nancy Pelosi's father and brother are connected to the Genovese mafia. Also, Cleveland Detroit mob, which connects to bootlegging from Canada from the Bonfim family. Long built-in connects. Oh, dang. That's wild. I'm gonna have to look into that. She did kind of seem like a mobster, didn't she? I mean, like, for those of you who didn't for those of you guys who didn't hear about this before, I could totally see how she'd be like a mob person. Dang. That's pretty interesting. Joe's dropping the facts over here. That's wild. But yeah, anyway, so like back to the CCP, there's like I don't know if there's videos of this, but I have heard that in communist China there's a super long workday. And if you work in these like in certain factories, they work them so hard for so long in such monotonous working areas that they had to put nets on the outside of the windows of these buildings because people would try and just like jump off the building and commit suicide, and they had to add nets to the buildings so that so that the workers didn't like kill themselves, which is kind of nuts, right? But on top of that, I am very aware of the fact that communist China has done some really crazy environmental things to their country in the name of industry. So this is something that I am very well versed about regarding communist China, is that when they were building their textile industry, one of the things that they traded off was, in return for growing their textile industry to the place that it is today, is that they had like no environmental regulation. There are literally rivers and areas of the ocean in China that are complete toxic dead zones. You couldn't like drink the water from some of these rivers because it is so full of industrial chemicals and dyes that it has become hazardous. Like, people who live in this area, they don't have any other source of water. They have to drink this water. But if you see pictures of these rivers, they are so full of dye that the river is these crazy colors like blue, red, green. And it's not a result of necessarily bacteria. It's purely industrial waste. Another thing is, most of you guys have seen, obviously, that a lot of in China, a lot of places in China, people have to wear masks. That's not necessarily because of like COVID-19. That was actually being used quite some time ago for the air quality there. The air quality's gotten so bad from the factories that the air is toxic. In some places in India, not to switch to a different country, but in some places in India that also have textile factories, the air quality is so bad that on bad air quality days where there's no wind to move all the toxic fumes out, they actually have like a bunch of traffic accidents on the freeway because nobody can see in front of them. So if one car crashes, everybody just kind of crashes into the next car. And the same is true for China in some areas where all these industrial factories are. Now, all this to say is that the CCP is a very malicious dictatorship. The CCP is very good at putting out propaganda. I follow some of the state-sanctioned media from the Chinese Communist Party because I like to see what kind of nonsense they're putting out, and they do a really good job of making everything look great there. But if you were to have some backdoor access to actually what's going on there, it is horrendous. There are internment camps where they put Christians and Muslims, and they do live organ harvesting of these groups so that basically they can sell them on the black market. Like, it's actual like organ harvesting sold on the black market, state sanctioned. And the reason I bring this up is because when we say that some of our supply chain stuff for our elections are coming from China, we can't just be like, oh, well, it's just like having something manufactured in Mexico or in Canada. It's not the same. It is a very different world over there. The government has a hand in pretty much every industry, and it is a huge national security risk to have all of these parts being used in election software coming from China without any federal oversight or regulation. So that's kind of like it. That's what I wanted to tell you guys about today. I kind of went a little bit on a rant there about China. Sorry, I get a little crazy about China sometimes. Not that I don't like the country. I think it's a beautiful country. I think the people there are beautiful. I think that the issue is that we here in the U.S. really underestimate like how malicious that government dictatorship is. If you guys have any questions, let me know in the chat and I'll answer them. I'll have to do some more digging into Nancy Pelosi. Joe says, who is better, China's whose propaganda is better, China's or ABC, CNN, NBC? That's a good question, Joe. You know what, I'm going to say for now China, because they have a worse situation, but I'm not gonna lie, CNN is up there. When I saw the fiery but mostly peaceful CNN bit, I was like, this is getting crazy. And I have heard a few people say that they believe that ABC, CNN, and MSNBC are now basically propaganda wings for the Democrat Party, and I do think that they're right. I think that they have completely put fact aside, and that's really dangerous when you have major news organizations who refuse to report anything. Joe, who do you think has better propaganda, China or ABC, CNN, MSNBC? Let's see what Joe says. Maybe he left us. Maybe he didn't like that I said China had better propaganda. I don't know. We'll see. But anyway, okay, so I think that is going to wrap it up for today, you guys. I will be back on tomorrow. I think I'm going to be on... Yeah, so tomorrow I switched to Thursdays on the Conservative Chicanos podcast live stream. I don't know if Jordan's going to be there tomorrow, but if you guys wanted to watch, it's the Conservative Chicanos YouTube channel, and I go on there and we just kind of chit-chat about everything that's going on in the world. So if you guys wanted to catch me there, you can. Otherwise, I think I'm going to do a live stream tomorrow at 6. Let's do that. So 6 o'clock tomorrow, live stream. Joe says that CNN, ABC takes the cake. You might not be wrong, Joe. You might not be wrong. CNN and ABC have been pulling some pretty shady stuff lately. I rarely watch them, to be honest, so I wouldn't know exactly everything that they're saying. But they are, you know, they do some crazy stuff sometimes. We'll see. We will see. Okay, but anyway, I will see you guys tomorrow. Thank you all for watching. If you want to read any of these articles that we covered today, you can catch them at thenomanzone.com. Also, if you felt like donating, you can donate on the site as well. It helps support my journalism. Xandra says no. Don't think he is. You're probably right, Xandra. All right. Well, I will see you guys all tomorrow. Xandra, I'll probably definitely see you tomorrow. I know you're always over at Conservative Chicanos. You're a fam over there, fam bam. But okay, guys, I appreciate everybody watching. You all have a good night. If you see any weird stuff going on with Dominion voting systems, you can always leave a comment, or you can email me at let's see here. It's the nomansland at protonmail.com is where I get all my tips. So if you guys see anything interesting, go ahead and shoot an email over there. Yeah, Jim and Jerry, you guys come on down tomorrow to Conservative Chicanos. It's a lot of fun. I usually just ramble and talk about all of my research, but when those other two come on, we balance each other out pretty well, and it's a lot of fun. We joke around, and it's really good. All right, see you tomorrow, Xandra. Take care. Get some sleep. I don't know where you are in the country, but I know it's getting late. But thank you all for watching, and you guys, I'll see you tomorrow. Take care, everyone. Bye.